Hi, and welcome to Vivian Health series on the Horizon in Healthcare. My name is Dr. Beth Brooks, and I'm the clinical advisor, and I've been doing a series of videos talking about evidence-based best practices around nurse recruitment. So today I wanted to talk about new graduates, and as you all know, it's an important process, hiring new graduates and onboarding and orienting new graduates. And so I wanted to share with you today some recent research findings that I believe are really helpful and so important if we can embrace some of the recommendations to help with our new grads adjust to the work environment. So every year, there's the National Association for Student Nurses does a survey, and they always do the survey after the May graduation class graduates. They usually do the survey in the fall. And then it also will capture, because of the length of the survey, it'll capture the December graduates as well. And so the survey has been done for a number of years by NSNA, and it's intended to capture the graduate nurses' experiences in their first 6 to 12 months of their transition from nursing student to professional nurse. And for those of you who've been around for a while, you remember the term reality shock. That was a term coined many years ago about a nurse who studied the transition from student to practicing nurse. And it was, for many young new nurses, a reality shock of what the unit was really like and what the work was really like compared to what they had been experiencing in school. And the other thing we learned and have used the term for many years is the honeymoon phase. There's this honeymoon phase where a new graduate comes into the organization and they're very optimistic, they're very excited, and they're ready to come to work and to, finally not be a student nurse anymore. But it can be a really stressful time for a new graduate. And so I want to talk a little bit today about what the research findings show and what hints they provide to us about things we can ask in the recruitment phase of the process of hiring new graduates, but then also some conversations we can have with the staff development or organizational development team around helping those new graduates make that transition. So I just want to provide some background on the survey itself. The survey is gleaned from the subjects for this study are from the National Student Nurses Association membership list. So it's a large national organization that represents nurses from all 50 states, multiple territories. They've been doing this study every year for 12 years. So there's a lot of data and knowledge that we can glean just by looking at over the past 12 years. How are those experiences of those new graduates changed? The data collection, as I said, is between 4 to 12, from May through the December. So it captures those new graduates and those two graduating cohorts. They also send out a couple of email reminders. This last year, there was 3,600 nurses that responded, a graduate who had just graduated. And it is a long survey. There are 72 items on the survey. So sometimes it could be a smaller number of nurses who have responded to questions. But generally speaking, every year they have between 2,000 and 6,000 nurses that respond to the survey. So this year they actually had 2,664 nurses respond. So it was a really good sample of the new graduate class. One thing they did different this year, which makes a whole lot of sense because I'm talking about the class of 2021, is they asked questions about COVID, especially around stress. And because so many colleges of nursing had to abandon their what we call practice-based learning, or the clinicals that nursing students complete, as soon as the pandemic came into our environments, many hospitals stopped allowing students to come in, which then meant all the colleges and schools of nursing had to quickly change all of their clinical hours, their practice-based hours, into simulation hours. And so that was a major change. And quite frankly, everyone was talking about how much we have to worry about how well the nurses will adapt during such a difficult time. So the class of 2021, so again, remember, this is the COVID, during COVID, Um, their number one concern, and this will not be surprise, is how much stress they were under and how the use of so much additional simulation impacted their confidence as a new graduate. So the other thing I want to start, though, let me take a step back. Turnover, new graduate turnover, as many know, often can be a challenge for new organizations. Turnover can be anywhere between 15 and 27%. Those new graduates will leave because of stress or anxiety or strain, or, as I mentioned earlier, this reality shock. Although this past class, 92% were hired in less than 3 months. So that sort of gives you an indication of the job market had changed dramatically. These new graduates found jobs very quickly. And interestingly enough, many of them had indicated their number one career option was either to be a travel nurse or to be an ICU nurse. And then ranked third was OB. And then fourth was emergency department. So this is a very interesting constellation of what these young nurses are wanting to do. We've generally not seen such a high desire for young nurses to travel. So that's something for us to keep in mind. And again, remember that in the class of 2021, a great deal of their clinical time was converted from patient care-based learning to simulation. And since 2014, one of the very first studies, we learned that it was acceptable to replace practice-based learning. 50% of practice-based learning could safely be replaced with simulation. And so we have seen an uptick in the amount of simulation in most colleges of nursing, which is a good thing because simulation is a very fine and reliable way for students to learn. But what we don't know is if you can have 100% simulation and how that will impact a new graduate's confidence and stress. And so that's what happened this last year. No one was anticipating, of course, having to do all simulation. And no surprise when I tell you that that high amount of simulation, those new graduates were much more stressed and had a lot less confidence in their skills and in their ability to adapt to their new work environment. So while clinical simulation can be used safely for 50% of clinical learning, and using it for 100% is probably not going to serve us well. Some of the other things we learned from this class that just graduated, and again, probably no surprise, 10% of them had no orientation at all. 22% of them had less than a month of orientation, and then another 22% had less than 3 months. So obviously, orientation was very condensed. There was only 5% of those nurses that had an orientation that lasted more than it, or for a year, which is some of the newer residency programs. So that, and then that data was even tremendously impacted by the size of the hospital. The smaller hospitals had much less ability to have enough orientation time than a larger hospital. Preceptors are critically important to new graduate orientation. Preceptors themselves were stressed. There were not enough of them. The nurse residency programs tended to not be offered as systematically or as programmatically as they typically are. So it was very difficult to tell with this group of graduates, did the residency make their transition easier? We know that mentors are incredibly important to new graduate transition. Again, no surprise, there was very little mentoring that was able to occur because of COVID. And then when I tell you some of the data around workplace stress, it was a really challenging time. The study looks at the environment and how much stress is in the environment, about the workflow and workload and my schedule and 12-hour shifts. And then we learned that interpersonal, that peer-to-peer communication or physician to nurse communication, delegation, being able to handle so much end-of-life care and high acuity. We just had a very unusual situation, and all of those factors have made it a really challenging time for our new graduates, and they're turning over. And so I don't want to make it sound like we didn't know some of these things, because we absolutely did. But I think the fact that we didn't have enough clinical time, practice-based clinical time, that has sort of exacerbated the findings that we learned this last year. So this group, as we've had time now to kind of go back and say, hey, how's that first year been? This is the time for different organizations to think about, okay, can we go back now and come back around and have some conversations with these new grads to help them better adjust as we move forward? And in fact, I'm hearing just from colleagues and some conversations about what they're doing now that everybody's been able to take a deep breath and relax a little bit, the kinds of programs they're putting into place to help retain those new graduates. So a couple of things I want to share. Again, this transition to practice is not necessarily a new phenomenon. We've continued to have challenges with connecting and making sure our new graduates are prepared for a smooth transition. But what we did learn also in this last study is the gender, and there's, for the first time, some gender and racial differences came out. And so depending on ethnic group, ethnicity, race, and gender, some of those new graduates even reported more stress, especially the men. So we've got a lot of data that we can do things about, knowing that this class of graduates really struggled with adapting to such an unusual clinical environment. So what are some of the recommendations moving forward? Orientation, critically important. Much more important, much more important, and I think than most people realize. We need to, the recommendation in the literature is to have as structured as an orientation as possible, minimizing simulation at this point and using more practice-based learning opportunities so that the new graduates can demonstrate competence, because they've had almost too much simulation this past year. Of course, you can still use simulation, but you need to make sure that you're doing that critical debriefing time after a simulation exercise. And of course, there are standards available to those who are interested in having the best recommendations around best practices for simulation. I would say another recommendation is to enhance or reestablish any mentoring program you've had. Most of the new graduates that in this last year that reported less stress often had a mentor and someone that they could debrief with and share, and someone that they could just help them answer questions that they had, and they felt a little less alone when they had a mentor. So think about bringing mentor programs back into your organization. Preceptors are an absolute must. They actually, in this particular study, set the tone for the new graduates' experience. And so the quality of care a new graduate will provide is very much influenced by their preceptor. So making sure that you have preceptors that are prepared to be preceptors. And, one of those expectations of professional nursing is that all nurses are teachers. And so are you, all of your, or as many of your nurses who are interested in being preceptors, doing so? And if so, they need formal preparation in how to be a preceptor, which then impacts how well that new graduate is socialized into professional nursing. Residency programs are also a tremendous option. There are certification and endorsement options now around the content and the programmatic steps in a residency that are available. Many hospitals don't have a residency because it's too expensive to create one, or it can be expensive. But then I always say, well, the cost on the back end of not having a residency is turnover. So trying to have a residency that complies or adheres to the standardization and the accreditation standards that are out there for nurse residencies is always a good strategy to use. So It's been a tough year, no doubt about it. I don't think there's any hospital that didn't struggle through this last term in this last year. I think this new group of graduates that's coming out now and will graduate this month, hopefully have had a little bit return to normalcy, but nonetheless, we know that orientation is really important. Do you have a mentoring program? Do you have a residency? Do you have preceptors? And all of those are best practices that you absolutely want to talk about in the recruitment process when your new graduates come to talk to your organization. So most new graduates will ask you because they've been, instructed or their faculty tell them to ask those questions. But nonetheless, be ready to answer those questions because they're really important to your success in recruiting the new graduates. So I want to thank you for joining me today. And if you have any other questions or would like a copy of the report, please let us know. And you can find us and visit our website at hire.vivian.com. Thank you.